The work looks at the chemical history of a particular site, and the way that I enter into that is through the ash of trees and woods that have grown in a particular location. So in this project, that is the edges of the riverbanks and wood that's found inside the rivers floating. And I take that wood, make ceramic replicas, and burn the wood down to collect the ash. And from that ash, I produce a glaze, which I then furnish the final pieces with. The woods that I've collected for this project have come from different locations, mainly from the east of Paris. So I started actually out on the River Marne. I was working with, collaborating with an ecologist who got me connected with Au Fil de l'Eau, who are an NGO that do river education, water education, and they also clean the river of driftwood. So that was the first site that I looked at, and from that river I collected willow stumps and branches. The next occasion that I found possible to collect from was along the riverbanks of the Seine, right at the convergence of the River Yonne and the River Seine. Just downstream. So by chance, I called around a lot of the local councils and asked if any trimming had been taking place along the riverbanks. And there just so happened to be a 60-metre long, 5-metre high pile of timber that had been cut down because this is just as you're approaching the lock, the écluse of the river, and there's a lot of canal boats that need to pull up, and the trees had grown over, and so they just took them all down. But I collected from that pile also willow, because I had willow from the Marne, and I thought, well, it might be good to take the same type of wood so that I can see if there's any kind of differences or similarities between the two sites using the same species of tree. In order to make a project like this, I have to work really closely with community members and sort of ordinary people that not necessarily always work in the science of environment. But for instance, for this project, I did work with an ecologist he does mainly consultation for places that need to be regenerated and these sorts of things post-industrial or agricultural works. And in order, as I don't speak very, very good French, I also had to find some really enthusiastic people to partner with that could help me along with the journey. So it was really kind of a localised affair. Also, as it's a ceramic project, needing to look for the kind of production materials. So I've been working from a local school in Paris in order to produce the work. And it's a kind of thing about the ceramic community as well, is that it's sort of it's quite a labour-intensive process. Everybody's really willing to give a hand, and so I've made a lot of contacts and really valuable networks since being here too. There's some ways in which my background has informed my practice. It's probably about 7 years ago that I went to the central desert of Australia, and I was working closely with a group of Aboriginal Australian potters that are called the Hermannsburg potters, and they live in a place called Ndaria. And when I was out there, I don't know if it's something about the Australian landscape, but, I feel very, very close to it in many ways. And so I just started to think about what is it that I could use that's local, that's kind of a refuse, like a material that's been thrown away. So I asked the group of potters if I could take some ash from behind their church. And my house at the time was surrounded by branches sticking out of the fence, and so I collected those. And I wasn't necessarily looking into, at that point of my studies, looking into chemical histories in a way that had been affected by humans and the Anthropocene, but just looking at how a tree's biological mechanisms can take chemicals from the ground and drink them, I suppose, and then how that remains within their substances after they're burnt. So this was the first occasion that I started working with wood ash glazes. And it just really fascinated me that I could produce almost evidence of a place through a glaze. And this year I thought that this was a really powerful and had a lot of potential. And I could go to other places and I could begin some sort of an archive of that, which I have been doing. So over the last 7 years, I've produced probably about 15 different site-specific glazes. And mainly in Australia until last year when I went to Chengdu with Cosmopolis 1.5, and I was working in a factory, a ceramics factory in Sichuan province, and there I created a bamboo ash glaze, a glaze of green tea, and also from a eucalyptus plantation that I found there. And so now I'm here in France, and this is another opportunity to take my methodology into a European context. And the way that I like to work is that from each project, starting from the one I did 7 years ago in Indaria to now, I keep records of not just the glaze aesthetic, but also the chemical analysis of the wood, of the ash. So from one project to the next, each are comparable. So and none is exactly the same. They might share similarities, but they're unique to the site. Usually within a glaze, that unique quality comes out within colour and texture. And sometimes you can't see exactly the chemical differences, but with the support of the chemical analysis and the aesthetic of the glaze, I kind of like to put those two things together to create some sort of alternative knowledge system of understanding the world. The way that where I see myself sitting in the Cosmopolis framework is that I see that there's a sort of a power within the environment, within trees, but soil, that can tell a history of a place. So I'm sort of putting the pieces together, and it's not a pure science of any sort. It is speculative. There's a bit of imagination, but there's also a bit of fact there as well. So this is how I see it relating to the Cosmopolis platform.